The Alpha King pretended to be weak for one night. Only his rejected mate saw through the mask. King Damian Cross had ruled the Blackthorn Pack for 10 years, and in all that time, no one had ever seen him falter. He walked into every room like he owned the air inside it. He spoke in a voice that made grown warriors lower their eyes. Strength was not simply his reputation, it was the throne he sat on, the wall that kept his pack safe, and the only language the other packs respected. So when his spies brought word that a rival alliance, led by the ambitious Ashford family, planned to test him at the coming solstice gathering, Damian did not reach for his sword first. He reached for a plan that felt far more dangerous than any blade. He would pretend to be weak. It was a strange kind of courage, choosing to look small in front of people who had spent years searching for any crack in his armor. But Damian understood something most alphas never learned. A king who looks unbreakable invites challenge. A king who looks broken invites carelessness. And carelessness, in his experience, was the easiest thing in the world to punish. The solstice gathering was held in the great hall of Blackthorn Manor, an old stone building lit with candles and firelight, filled with lords, ladies, and pack leaders from every corner of the region. It was a night of alliances, quiet threats, and polite smiles that hid sharper things underneath. Damian had attended a dozen of these gatherings as an unshakable king. Tonight, he planned to attend it as something else entirely. He let his shoulders curve forward, just slightly, as if the weight of his crown had finally become too much. He allowed his voice to catch during the formal toasts, a small tremor that made several lords glance at each other with quiet interest. He stumbled once on the ceremonial steps leading to his seat, catching himself just barely, as though his legs had betrayed him for a heartbeat. To the watching crowd, it read exactly as he wanted it to. Whispers moved through the hall like a slow tide. The king is tired, the king is cracking. 10 years is a long time to carry a crown alone. By the time the main feast began, Damian could see it in their eyes, the small, satisfied glint of people who believed they had found an opening. Only one person in the entire hall did not believe a single second of it. Elena Marsh stood near the edge of the room, a glass of untouched wine in her hand, watching him with an expression that gave away nothing to anyone else, but underneath, her mind was working fast. She was his rejected mate, a fact everyone in the room knew, whispered about, and quietly enjoyed reliving whenever the two of them were in the same space. 3 years ago, in front of the entire pack, Damian had refused the mate bond that fate had given them both. Elena had been an Omega with no title back then, no political weight, no family alliance worth mentioning. A king could not afford a weak link standing beside his throne, not when every other pack was waiting for a reason to test him. So he had said the words that ended it, cold and final, while Elena stood there and absorbed the humiliation in front of everyone who had ever looked down on her. She had hated him every day since. She had also, without meaning to, spent 3 years learning to read him better than anyone alive. It was not something she was proud of. It had started as self-protection, a way to predict his moods so she could stay out of his path at pack gatherings. Over time it had become something closer to instinct. She noticed the smallest details about him without even trying. The way his jaw tightened before he made an unpopular decision, the way his eyes went flat and careful right before he lied, the way real exhaustion looked on him, heavy and slow, nothing like the performance she was watching tonight, because that was exactly what it was, a performance. She noticed the weakness never touched his eyes, which stayed sharp and calculating even while his shoulders slumped. She noticed his stumble on the steps happened at the exact moment the Ashford Lord glanced his way, and vanished the instant that attention moved elsewhere. She noticed his hand, resting near his hip where his blade would normally sit, steady and ready, not trembling the way a broken man's hand would tremble. Elena set her wine down without drinking it, and watched him work the room like an actor who had memorized every line of a play only he could see. She almost said nothing. It would have been easy to say nothing. 3 years of hurt had earned her the right to watch him struggle, real or fake, and simply enjoy the show. Part of her wanted to let him walk into whatever trap he was building for himself, if that was even what this was. Let the great Alpha King figure out his own mess for once. But another part of her, the part she liked less, could not stop wondering what he was actually doing. Damian Cross did not do anything without a reason. He never had. Even the worst thing he had ever done to her had been calculated, cold, and deliberate, which was somehow worse than if he had simply been careless. She waited until the feast ended and the hall began to empty, lords and ladies drifting toward their guest chambers, servants clearing long tables of half-finished food. Damien remained near the head of the hall a moment longer than necessary, speaking with two Ashford representatives in a low, tired voice that made the older lord actually pat his shoulder with something like pity. Pity for the Alpha King. Elena almost laughed out loud. She followed him at a distance when he finally left the hall, moving through the stone corridor that led toward the private wing of the manor. The moment the last of the guests turned a corner behind them and the corridor emptied, she quickened her pace and stepped directly into his path. Damien stopped. For half a second, his shoulders remained curved, his expression still holding on to that careful weariness. Then he looked at her properly, and something in his face shifted, sharpened, came back into focus like a blade being unsheathed. "You're not weak," Elena said. It was not a question. The tiredness dropped from him instantly, like a coat he had simply chosen to take off. His spine straightened. His eyes, which had looked distant and clouded all evening, turned clear and assessing, studying her the way he studied everyone, searching for the angle, the threat, the reason. "No one else noticed," he said quietly. "No one else has spent 3 years hate-watching your every move," Elena shot back, the words coming out sharper than she intended, though not sharp enough to hide the truth in them. A long silence stretched between them in the dim corridor, broken only by the distant sound of servants still clearing the hall. Damien studied her for a moment longer, and Elena forced herself not to look away, not to give him the satisfaction of seeing her nerves. "The Ashford Alliance is planning something," he finally said. "I have suspected it for weeks. Small movements along the eastern border, quiet meetings between their scouts and 2 smaller packs who owe me nothing. If they believe I am too weak or too distracted to notice, they will move sooner and less carefully. And a careless enemy is an enemy I can defeat cleanly, without dragging half the region into a war that will cost lives on both sides. And your solution was to convince an entire hall of lords that their king is falling apart. My solution was to convince them of exactly enough to make them careless. Nothing more." Elena crossed her arms. "And instead you handed the one person who could expose the whole act a front-row seat to it." Something flickered across Damien's face, something that looked almost like amusement, though it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I did not plan for you to notice. No one plans for that, it just happens." She let the words hang there, heavier than she meant them to be, and watched him absorb them without flinching, which was somehow more irritating than if he had looked guilty. "Will you tell them?" he asked. Direct, the way he always was when something actually mattered to him. Elena thought about it. She thought about the humiliation of 3 years ago, the way the entire pack had watched him reject her, the years of quiet whispers and pitying looks she had endured because of one cold sentence he had spoken in front of everyone. She thought about how easy it would be to walk back into that hall right now and tell the Ashford lord exactly what she had seen, and watch the king's careful plan collapse in real time. She thought about all of that, and then she thought about something else. About the eastern border, and the smaller packs who might get pulled into a war they never chose, and the ordinary people in Blackthorn territory who trusted their king to keep them safe, whether or not that king had ever been particularly kind to her personally. "No," she said finally, and watched surprise flash briefly across his face before he hid it. "But you are going to tell me everything, all of it, starting right now, in this corridor, before either of us moves another step." Damien studied her for a long moment, as though weighing whether trusting her was a risk worth taking. Then, slowly, he nodded, and the two of them stood together in the dim candlelight while he explained, in careful detail, exactly what he had noticed along the border, exactly what he suspected the Ashford Alliance intended, and exactly how far he was willing to let his performance of weakness go before he needed it to stop. Elena listened without interrupting, filing away every piece of information with the same sharp attention she had once used only to protect herself from him. When he finished, she asked questions, good ones, questions that made him pause and reconsider small details he had overlooked. By the time the candles in the corridor had burned low, they were no longer simply talking. They were planning together, two minds working the same problem from different angles, each one sharpening the other. It was strange, standing there with him, arguing over strategy instead of old wounds. Strange and unexpectedly steady, like finding solid ground after years of uncertain footing. "Why are you helping me?" Damien asked eventually, when the corridor had gone almost fully quiet, the last servants long since retired for the night. "You have every reason not to." Elena considered the question honestly before answering. "Because whatever you did to me 3 years ago, this is not about me. It is about people who will get hurt if the Ashford Alliance decides war is worth the risk. I am not doing this for you." "I did not think you were." A pause. "Thank you, regardless." She did not answer that. Some wounds did not close simply because someone finally acknowledged them, and Elena was not interested in pretending otherwise, not even for a king who had just spent an hour trusting her with information that could destroy him if she chose to use it. They did not become friends that night, not exactly. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful apology that erased 3 years of hurt. Damien did not suddenly become the mate he had once refused to be, and Elena did not suddenly forgive him simply because he had let his guard down in a quiet corridor. Some things were not repaired in a single conversation, no matter how honest it was. But something else formed between them instead, something colder and more useful than romance, and in its own way, just as rare: understanding. Two people who now knew exactly how dangerous the other could be, and who had chosen, for one long night, to stand on the same side of a fight neither of them had asked for. When the sun rose over Blackthorn Manor the next morning, King Damien Cross walked into the dining hall, standing tall, his voice steady, his shoulders squared, every trace of the previous night's weakness gone, as though it had never existed. The watching lords noticed the change immediately, and confusion flickered across more than one face. The Ashford representatives exchanged a quiet, uncertain glance across the table. Elena sat near the far end of the hall, sipping her tea, watching the king reclaim his throne in front of everyone who had underestimated him only hours before. She caught his eye once, briefly, across the crowded room. He gave her the smallest nod, barely more than a shift of his chin, an acknowledgement meant for her alone. She did not smile, she did not nod back. But she held his gaze a moment longer than necessary, before returning to her tea, and for the first time in 3 years, the silence between them did not feel entirely like an old wound. It felt, instead, like the quiet beginning of something neither of them had a name for yet.